Today on CityCast Madison. It's the Friday News Roundup. This week, I'm joined by CityCast Madison's Molly Stentz and Hayley Sperling. The state Supreme Court says Wisconsin needs new political maps. Our current ones are unconstitutional. Longtime UW-La Crosse Chancellor is ousted for his extracurricular activities, and the Madison School District is taking its first step in reforming its grading system. It's Friday, January 5th. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Hey, welcome to the Friday News Roundup. Good news is the holidays were kind to us. We're rested, bright-eyed, and bushy-tailed, and that's also very opportune because we're starting the new year with some major movements in local politics and education. Joining me today to get into it is the captain of this here podcast, Molly Stentz. Molly Stentz, hello.
Hey, it's been a minute.
It's been a minute. And our newsletters are Hayley Sperling. What's good?
Hi, Bianca. Hi, Molly.
All right. Now, Molly, you have our first story today.
Yeah. So, our first roundup of the year. Normally it feels like this time of year is kind of sleepy. Not a lot of news. But not so. We got this, Friday news dump. Classic, right? The Friday before Christmas when everybody, I feel like, was wanting to do other things, traveling, thinking about holidays. It was like, oh, here's some big news. Our political maps are being thrown out by the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Hello. So that happened. And what it means now is that new maps are being redrawn for the state with a deadline of next week. So, yeah, no big deal. Quiet time.
Happy holidays.
Yeah. The Wisconsin Supreme Court said that our political maps are unconstitutional. Not due to the reason that you might think. A lot of people talk about how the maps give a partisan advantage to Republicans, but they actually didn't talk about that. They talked about the way the districts are built and that they're not contiguous, right? So that's really what they were weighing in on with this lawsuit. And they said that in order for the maps to be constitutional, to represent people of the state equally, these maps that determine who you vote for, they have to look in a certain way, right? They have to be contiguous, they have to be compact, and they should try to obey the political boundaries that exist. So basically don't carve up a city and obey the county lines, right? So that all the neighbors in a city or a county are in the same assembly district, so to speak. Basically, they're saying follow the existing boundaries when you can. These are the principles that should apply when you go to make maps, which determines who people vote for. So that happened. They threw them out. And now we're going to get new ones. Will that happen by next week? That's what the courts asked for. So the Republicans in the legislature, as well as Governor Evers, are coming up with these new sets of maps to be presented to the court. And they've got this big deadline coming up of March, right? Because elections are happening and there's all this behind the scenes work that has to happen in order to make the elections run, which means that we got to have these maps in place by March. That's what the Elections Commission says, which means that we have to have a plan for them and everybody has to fight over them. We have to have some agreement. Woof, is this going to happen? That's my question. I feel like we should take bets.
Well, I think it will. It's gonna happen, and it's under a pressure cooker. My bet is, what are we betting? Money, 4-leaf clovers,
Democracy.
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 Like-
the fate of our democracy.
The previous maps were really creative. They were all over the place. So now it's time to make them more uniform, bring them back into contiguous spaces. I imagine they'll get it done, but the agreement part, that's the big hurdle.
Yeah, I think that they're going to have to do it, and I mean, Democrats are super, super motivated to get working on this, and they've already got stuff laid out. So they're like excited to get rolling on this. I think it's just a matter of like, will Republicans play ball here, right? Like, will they come to the table and be part of these conversations and like actively participate, or will they try to stonewall? But also now that the courts have intervened, right? Like, I don't know if that's even an option because they said, like, you have to do this. And when one branch tells another branch, you got to do something, like, you tend to listen.
Yeah, unless they try to get the ear of the U.S. Supreme Court. And unless the U.S. Supreme Court decides to intervene, which is a big if.
That would be a huge if, but haven't we already tried that, right? And then didn't they punt on that? They were like, you guys figure it out. So seems like the odds of that, I mean, someone could try and petition the court for sure. I could see that happening, but it getting passed or it getting heard by anyone or by the U.S. Supreme Court, I think those odds are probably lower.
Yeah, it would have to be on a different question, but the courts have waited on this so many times, right? So we'll see what happens next. I feel like we're going to have to get a state capitol political reporter to give us all the news on this story because it's going to affect Wisconsin, and as goes Wisconsin, huge impact on the nation. So we will stay on it.
So before we dive into any more news, y'all, let's take a quick break. It's January, folks, and in case you forgot, we live in Wisconsin. Although it's been an unusually warm winter, we still need to prepare for slippery and icy roads. Attorney Z. Usman with Usman Law wants to remind you of some of the winter rules of the road to help keep you safe. So remember, accelerate and decelerate slowly. Don't follow any car too closely. Avoid using cruise control. Steer in the direction of a skid. And don't stop when going up a hill. If you are in an accident, call Attorney Z. Usman. He's handled hundreds of insurance claims and can ensure you get everything you are owed. There are no upfront costs and no fee unless he is successful. Also, pro tip, don't negotiate with the insurance company on your own. Go visit MadisonAccidentLawyer.com to schedule a free call with Attorney Usman. All right, we are back, and we are switching from political drawn maps to education. There's some wild stories. There's some more wild, wild west stories coming out of the UW system.
Yes. So out of the UW system, Joe Gao, aka the now former chancellor of UW-La Crosse, aka the longest serving of any of UW system's current 13 chancellors, got booted from his job. Why? Thank you for asking. Because he was making porn with his wife. Who was also a former UW-La Crosse faculty member at one point too. But so the big question here is like, is this a violation of his First Amendment rights? And there are a lot of questions going on here, right? So basically, the regents came down in a very fast way. They held a closed door meeting and then immediately just said, all right, like, you are out as chancellor. The question of his tenure is still kind of up in the air. But what's interesting here is that, Gao was set to actually step down from this position at the end of the academic year. So he was already on his way out. And then the regent said, nope, we can't have you here anymore. 17 years worth of work almost is just, you're done. So he was fired from the position. And now the question, again, like I said, of his faculty tenure is under question. And so now the question is, are people allowed to have lives outside of work? Is it unbecoming of a UW chancellor to make adult videos with his consenting wife and with other adult film stars? So a little bit more context on that end. Gao and his wife had a YouTube channel that they operated, and under the name Sexy Happy Couple. That was kind of their moniker. And they ran this Sexy Happy cooking show in which the two of them would invite another adult film star over, and they would cook a vegan meal together because Joe and his wife are vegans. They're very healthy people. And they would all cook a meal together, and that would go up on YouTube. And then the more X-rated version would go up on other websites. And so they've been doing this for years. You know, they've been doing this kind of side hustle for about like 8 years. They've published 2 books under pen names about their lives and relationships and whatnot in this industry and with this work. And now suddenly it came out publicly, and the UW system was very quick to just kind of shut it down and say, we don't want any part of this, and we don't want you representing us. And now, again, there's a bunch of questions circling around. Is it free speech? Is this protected? Is this right? Are people allowed to contain multitudes? Let's start there on those easy questions, right?
Or were they actually just fired for being vegans? I mean,
right.
Just trying to save the planet.
In La Crosse, I don't know.
Yeah,
they didn't like it.
The first time I heard about this story, my first thought was like, okay, where's the crime? There's not a crime.
Right.
There's not a crime. But I guess just puritanical views, people clutching their pearls, like, oh dear, oh my. But then the way you described it, you know, it sounds, I don't know, people like cooking and love and veganism. I don't know. It seems, I could see people thinking this is cruel and unusual punishment and just like, I don't know, kind of backwards thinking.
100%. 100%. I mean, my first thought when I heard this story is, where are the free speech Republicans? And I will leave that question as that, open-ended.
But it is a political position.
Is it?
You know,
I mean, yes, it is in a certain aspect, yes, but also like, is this behavior, I guess, something that is doing damage to the university, to the system, to the state? And some might argue yes, because like what Bianca said, you know, we live in a society where we really don't talk about sex. Like Americans, I think specifically, have such an aversion to talking about sex and like to talking about porn. And that's why the industry has fallen, you know, in the way that it has, which is, you know, not super wholesome. You know, I think there are a lot of people out there trying to change that face, but it's going to be a very, very long road for sure.
It seems like it's increasingly political, the UW system. I wonder if that's part of it. It's like all eyes. I don't know. I hear your point about it being a political position. It also, I've heard, you know, recently, it's just disappointment around that politicization. I guess they're always political playgrounds.
The craziest thing to me out of this whole story was that I learned that UW-La Crosse was like the best fiscally managed campus in the system, and that blew my mind a little bit.
Yes,
that tracks for me. Sorry, Madison, my alma mater.
but like that's what's so crazy is, you know, like, and Gao this whole time like has really led the university through some really troubling times, like at a time when enrollment across the system had decreased. Like things had held steady at La Crosse, and they were, like you said, Molly, among the like financially best positions across the whole system, which is super rare for a regional campus. Like that's not UW-Madison.
Yeah, it bucks the trend, and it also speaks to like, what is the job of a chancellor, right? The chancellor is to ensure resources and stewardship of that campus, right? And so you think, well, shoot, if they don't get along with the regents, if they don't get along with the legislature, those are huge partners. Like it's gonna be really hard to be successful in your job if you don't have those people that have your back. But on the other hand, it's hard to argue he wasn't doing a good job managing the campus when the finances were good. So that's what's interesting.
Yeah, so if you want to make sexy cooking shows with your partner, what of it? What does it have to do with your work?
As long as your university is thriving, I say go for it. I think that's the question. The regents called Gao's behavior, quote unquote, abhorrent and reckless, which I think is kind of a step too far. Again, I can understand why this is not necessarily behavior that would be perhaps perceived as becoming of a university chancellor. But again, I really do think that it is up to us to challenge these perspectives and to be just become a bit more sex positive as a society, because we dig ourselves into these holes this way, right? And I will say, this isn't the first time that Gao has gotten backlash for bringing up the adult entertainment industry in higher education. A few years ago, he had invited another adult actress onto campus to speak, and the regents really did not like that. Got immediate backlash there too. So it's kind of like a little weird foreshadowing of what was to come.
Also crazy that he had been chancellor for years, right? And that he had been making videos for a while. And nobody knew in La Crosse, which is not that big a place.
Exactly. Well, I think it was a matter of where they were posting. At first, they weren't posting on the big sites like Pornhub. They were doing things on a smaller one. So I guess someone in La Crosse found it when they went a little bit more global. But, I think the moral of this story is that we should truly all be so lucky to have a partner that you can share so many hobbies with, right? The craziest part of this story is that they're a vegan couple who's crazy accomplished in their fields, and they also love to make love.
Yeah.
And I think that's beautiful.
Who says that wasn't fueling all their success? We'll never know. They're cutting it off.
Exactly.
But if you attract the ire of the legislature, can you do your job?
I guess.
As a political leader of a campus.
Keep it in the bedroom, keep it in the studio, keep it off campus is what they're saying. I think that's going to bite them in the butt. We'll have to revisit this one.
This is so juicy. Speaking of new ideas in educational spaces and taking on new ideas or not taking them on, the Madison School District is making a move that's part of a years-long effort to change things up around grading. They are moving to drop letter grades. No more A++++ for you, Mr. Salutatorian. They've been eyeing ways to change their grading system for years, and it's officially starting this semester at East High School with 9th graders. So in English classes, Spanish, and algebra, and a handful of other classes. Students will now be graded with a new grading scale that is looking at evaluating students through class on how well they meet learning standards. So rather than A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, AB, the regular grading scale, they're changing using a new handbook. So advanced AD, so someone who's achieved, that's the top level, someone who's achieved deep understanding of the subject matter that goes beyond the learning target, proficient, developing, emerging, and insufficient evidence that the person is meeting proficiency standards, and no opportunity. So there's a whole different grading scale. It's easier if you look at it, but the hope is to kind of look at students in a way that can track their progress over the semester in different ways. Patty Schaefer, the district's STEM director, says that they think that the move to this sort of program would more accurately portray how students are learning across the semester and across the school year versus using the old point system. So yeah, if things work out, Schaefer, the STEM director, says that this sort of program would likely be implemented in other grades and schools down the line. I haven't heard of this until just today, and I kind of like it. It's new. I'm interested in change, and I don't know, maybe it can change attitudes in school too around, someone being a failure. I assume that's one of the pushes. It's F, you failed. Well,
yeah. I'm I'm curious as to how this will affect like college admission standards, because like, I mean, I know a lot of schools are dropping, requirements for ACT and SAT scores, but like schools are still looking at like grades and GPAs. So like, how does this factor in with that? Though I guess, these schools are also already accounting for high schools across the country that grade on weird scales and whatnot. So this is just kind of another one to toss in there. I do like the idea of not grading students, but rather like actually evaluating them. Like this seems like a bit of a more holistic approach. And I think that like, not to say that it would deter competition, but I think it would make climbing that ladder in terms of like grades a little bit easier, right? Like you're not necessarily competing with someone who got an advanced versus like proficient grade. You can kind of figure out like what are your next steps to move from proficient to advanced. It's an interesting way to look at the system. And I think, at least for me, it would be easier to not compare myself to others if I were in that position, because I feel like, my questions about grades when I was in high school was like, oh, what'd you get on this test? What'd you get? Like, how did I do bad? Like, whatever. And this is kind of a way around that.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's an interesting concept for sure.
And maybe a move away from sorting people into groups of like, oh, these are the A students, these are the C students, and more into actually assessing what people are learning.
Right.
Which feels good. And some colleges have moved to this system. I know my husband's went to Reed, and they had a more similar system to actually like assessing whether you've met certain goals and whether you've learned certain concepts away from, just like, did you get a 94% on the test, and assigning a letter grade.
Yeah. Also, we know historically things like standardized tests, things like testing, people perform differently, in part because there's been evidence of bias in the way questions are written, and people are coming at that sort of system of evaluation in different ways. And there's like there's all sorts of complicated factors and like why someone's not a good test taker. But I've always thought it was a really stupid way to evaluate like someone's potential and where they're at. And this seems like another step towards getting away from some of that myopic rating of people, and also numbers. Like I just remember a bunch of kids like totally getting caught up about many like points above 4.0 they had. Like it just got crazy. And I bet Madison schools in particular, people are like have 4.7s or something. I'm just kidding, but like you start getting really complicated, and it's like, where even are we with all of these like points? So,
and there's always that kid, right, that like does super well on the tests because they're great test takers or because they absorb the right information, but they don't do well in class because they're not handing in assignments or whatnot, and that would always piss me off too, where it's just like, it's always that one, and it was always a boy, it was always a man who just did not try in class, but then would get 90s on all the quizzes and stuff. And it's just like, it's not fair to compare yourself to them, right? It's everyone learns differently, and now I think this is a way for everyone to kind of not to like level the playing field, but just to again like take a more holistic approach to grading and to evaluation. Though I can also see that this could be harder for teachers because they're also already very stressed. But I'm curious to know what any teachers would think about this system too. So if you're a teacher, give us a call. I'm interested.
Yes. Or leave us an email at madison.citycast.fm. Let us know. Maybe kids will stop asking you for little points. But there is one test that I do really like. Just want to mention this education story really quickly, which is around driver's ed. I did not know this, and I'm just letting you guys know. There was a pandemic era pilot program by the Wisconsin Department of Transportation that basically allowed parents to sign a waiver that their kid didn't have to take the driver's test. Blows my friggin' mind. I'm out in the water. Like, that was what taught me how to drive, was me making sure I could do the parallel parking for that test. But that pilot has ended. It was up for 3.5 years. It was designed to ease the backlog of teens trying to get their driver's licenses during the height of the pandemic. But that road test waiver program has ended, which makes me feel safer in these streets.
Yes, thank God, because honestly, that's kind of terrifying. I did not even know that existed until this very moment, until you said something, and to think that, like, I'm out there on the road with these teens who have not been properly tested on their driving skills. I mean, it feels absurd to say it, but, you know, it is just kind of like, some places I think we do need standards. Like when we're all agreeing to the same rules, you know, like traffic rules, we all agree that like this is how it works. Then like having a standardized test makes sense, right?
No need for creativity on the road. No need for creativity on the road.
No, not at all. Like to know that these kids are really like wilding out there. Like maybe that's where all these like Kia boys came from, because they never had to parallel park. They don't know the pain we've been through to get this license.
They don't know our pain. All right. Thanks for rounding up the news with me this week. That was Molly Stentz. Thank you.
Heyo.
And Hayley Sperling.
Thank you.
That's all for today here on CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, your host. This week, we're produced by Molly Stentz, Xandra McMahon, and me. Our newsletter editor is Hayley Sperling. Our theme music is by Carl Christensen. Don't forget, you can get more news delivered right to your inbox by subscribing to Madison Minutes, our newsletter. And if you enjoyed today's show, why not share this podcast with someone who likes to cook with their partner? See you back here Monday morning with more stories from around the city. Until then,